Breaking news out of Millerville, California. A story so wild, so unbelievable, and so downright American that our newsroom had to triple-check the details before going live. And even after verifying every document, talking to witnesses, and reviewing the county records ourselves, the general consensus was still the same. There's no way this actually happened, right? Oh, it happened. And it happened in broad daylight. Tonight, we bring you a high-stakes confrontation between one retired firefighter, one extremely overconfident HOA president, 500 trespassing festival goers, and tens of thousands of honeybees who accidentally became the most unexpectedly heroic security team in recent American history. What started as a simple property dispute spiraled into a full-blown incident involving forged legal documents, environmental violations, harassment campaigns, bribery of a government inspector, and an organized attempt to take over privately owned land using yoga mats, corporate-style branding, and a social media-powered wellness movement. And all of this was orchestrated by one woman, known across the neighborhood as Karen Westfield, who believed she could turn a veteran firefighter's three-generation ranch into her personal playground. But she didn't expect the landowner, 62-year-old Wes Hoffman, to bring out backup. Not deputies, not lawyers, not security guards. We're talking bees. 40,000 bees. This is the story of how a quiet California community became ground zero for one of the wildest neighborhood showdowns in U.S. history. And to break it down cleanly, clearly, and with the full intensity this saga deserves, at Global Pulse News brings you the top 10 most insane moments in the case now known nationwide as the Beehive incident. Let's get into it. It begins with a move so bold, so bizarrely confident, that most Americans hearing it say the same thing. There's just no way she really did that. Except she did, and she did it with a smile, a clipboard, and a social media post full of inspirational quotes about community unity. Karen announced a full-on weekend festival. Camping, yoga sessions, meditation sessions, vegan food vendors, sound bathing, and stargazing. She branded it Community Healing Weekend. Beautiful, right? Sure, except for one microscopic issue. She planned the entire thing on land she didn't own, didn't rent, didn't have permission to use, didn't even ask. Yep, she dropped the location pin right in the middle of West Hoffman's private pasture, a 15-acre property his family had owned since 1952, and then invited 500 strangers to camp there. Tickets? $50 a person. You don't need a calculator for that one. 500 people times $50 equals one very illegal and incredibly profitable $25,000 land grab disguised as a wellness retreat. And the wildest part? She promoted the event like she was hosting Coachella. High-quality graphics, branded hashtags, limited camp spots, book now banners. She even secured porta potties and sound equipment like she was preparing for an outdoor TED Talk. Now, imagine waking up on a Saturday morning, pouring yourself a cup of coffee, and looking out your window only to see a convoy of SUVs, Subarus, Teslas, and Instagram influencer types marching toward your property like they're entering a national park you didn't know you owned. That was Wes's morning. A man who had spent 30 years literally running into burning buildings woke up to find a crowd of yoga warriors acting like their pasture was their spiritual campground. And not a single one of them had permission to be there. Karen didn't care. In her mind, this was historic public land. In her Facebook posts, she claimed it was traditionally accessible and part of a community easement. Except every one of those claims collapsed under the weight of actual county records. But we'll get to that. Here's the important part. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a deliberate, organized ticket-selling operation orchestrated on someone else's property, and Karen was banking on Wes being too old, too tired, or too overwhelmed to stop her. She didn't realize she'd picked a fight with a firefighter. And firefighters, they don't back down. They assess, strategize, and act. And Wes was about to act. But if you think charging 25 grand in camping fees on someone else's land is the wildest part of this story, oh, trust me, that's just fact one. The next part is where the harassment campaign goes from annoying to downright sinister.
The moment Karen realized Wes wouldn't simply roll over and let her run California Coachella on his ranch, she switched playbooks. Hard. She went from peace, love, and wellness to paperwork warfare faster than you can say HOA violation. It began with a perfectly polished, aggressively worded letter delivered via certified mail. The kind of letter that feels like it's judging you even before you open it. Inside, a list of alleged violations, including dangerous beehives posing a threat to community children, unsightly agricultural structures lowering neighborhood value, improper livestock containment, unauthorized agricultural activity. If you're wondering how beehives became livestock, congratulations, you officially understand HOA logic. Karen's angle was simple. If she couldn't physically move West off the land, she'd drown him in complaints. Except she missed one crucial detail. Wes's property wasn't part of the HOA. Never had been, never would be. The land predated the entire development by about 70 years, meaning the HOA had as much authority over his land as a random guy at Costco telling you how many hot dogs you're allowed to buy. But Karen wasn't the type to let facts ruin her dreams. She started escalating. Daily complaints to the county, anonymous calls to animal control, a slideshow presentation full of bee attack photos ripped straight from Google Images, claims that his bees were Africanized killer bees, and pressure on neighbors to stand up to the threat. And the best part? Her presentation was so dramatic it looked like a high school project done by someone who forgot it was due until 3 a.m. Wes responded like a true American professional. He brought out receipts, permits, certifications, bee health reports, agricultural documents, state registrations, all meticulously maintained. He knew exactly what he was doing. He wasn't just protecting his bees, he was building a brick wall of legal defense. Meanwhile, Karen kept charging forward like an influencer who believed her follower count was a superpower. She held meetings, she started a community safety group. She told neighbors that his bees were aggressive and unregulated. She handed out flyers like a political candidate desperately begging for votes. But here's where the plot twists. The more she attacked, the more mistakes she made, and the more attention she drew. And attention wasn't good for someone who was quietly laying the groundwork for a massive real estate takeover. And if fake HOA threats weren't enough, wait until you hear about the moment Karen fenced herself into a corner with one of the biggest accidental confessions in suburban history. With Wes resisting her paperwork, Karen decided to go boots on the ground. Literally. She formed what you could generously call a wellness troupe, or, more accurately, a roaming band of Lululemon explorers. Every morning, while Wes inspected his hives, a group of 15 to 20 athleisure cloud wellness walkers strolled straight onto Wes's property, pretending they were using an historic public walking trail. Only one problem. There has never been a public trail on that land. Not in the 1950s, not in the 1800s, not ever. But Google one blog post about rural access rights, and suddenly half the neighborhood believed they were modern-day pioneers reclaiming sacred pathways. These walkers weren't subtle either. Setting yoga mats in your hives, taking Instagram photos next to bee boxes, chanting affirmations in a man's pasture, talking loudly about rebalancing community spaces, and filming TikToks like they were saving the planet. And just when Wes thought the situation couldn't get more surreal, Derek arrived, Karen's husband.
armed with surveying equipment so high-tech it could map the moon. Except he wasn't mapping the moon. He was illegally mapping Wes's land. He claimed he was verifying community boundaries. Translation: they were prepping a hostile takeover disguised as wellness outreach. Every measurement Derek took, every photo he snapped, every peg he hammered into the dirt was part of a long-term strategy to redraw lines that legally weren't theirs to draw. But fate and science had other plans. Because during all this surveying, Derek discovered something truly catastrophic. Something that instantly shifted the entire balance of power. Their septic system was illegally draining onto Wes's property and had been for nearly 2 years. Meaning, environmental violations, potential federal fines, contamination liability, and criminal negligence. Karen, the self-appointed protector of community wellness, was literally polluting the land she claimed to be spiritually reclaiming. This wasn't just hypocrisy. It was the kind of mistake that ends lawsuits before they even start. And Wes? He documented everything. And as we move into the next phase of this saga, the stakes get higher, the schemes get uglier, and the lies get so wild you'd think this was scripted. But it wasn't. It was real life. And the next facts take us straight into forged documents, bribery, and the kind of meltdown you only see on live TV.
If you thought the illegal walkers, septic disaster, and $25,000 unlawful campground were wild enough, buckle your seatbelts, because this is where Karen graduated from HOA headache to possible federal crime enthusiast. With Wes refusing to bow to her intimidation, Karen pulled out what she believed would be her ace in the hole, a folder of historic easement documents that supposedly proved the community had the right to access his land. According to her, these papers dated back to the 1940s, handwritten surveys, stamped maps, and even a typewritten grant of access with signatures from long-deceased county officials. Sounds convincing, right? Yeah, until you look closer. Because the ink still smelled like fresh toner. The paper? Straight from a modern office printer. The seals? Crooked, like someone dragged them onto a Word document and slapped print. But Karen wasn't thinking about authenticity. She was thinking about theatrics. She marched right up to Deputy Martinez, who had been called to assess the public event, and handed them over with the smug confidence of someone who believes Pinterest legal templates count as government documents. Martinez opened the folder, paused, squinted, and then did that slow exhale law enforcement does when they know someone is about to dig their own grave. He politely excused himself, stepped aside, and called the county recorder's office. And the county's response? We've never seen these documents before. Those record numbers don't exist. Those signatures don't match any known official. These easements have never been filed, and none of these sheets come from county archives. Translation in plain American English, every single one of those official papers was fake. Meanwhile, Karen was standing 15 feet away, arms crossed, wearing the expression of someone waiting for their Oscars acceptance speech. She truly believed this moment would change everything, that she'd stroll back to the campground, raise her bullhorn, and announce triumphantly that the law had sided with her wellness crusade. But as the seconds passed, her confidence started to crack like old paint. Because Martinez walked back toward her with the kind of steady, measured steps that make guilty people sweat. He held the papers up like radioactive evidence. "Ma'am," he said, "where exactly did you obtain these documents?" Karen stammered. She blinked. She did that lip bite people do when they're trying to invent a lie in real time. The county archives?" she claimed. Except Martinez had just spoken to those archives. He pressed further. "These recording numbers do not exist. These aren't county forms. These seals aren't authentic, and the paper itself isn't even archival stock. In other words, Karen wasn't just bluffing. She had forged legal documents to justify trespassing, land theft, and a commercial event organized without any permits. Fraud, forgery, misrepresentation, intent to deceive. Pick your legal chapter. She checked the boxes. And in that moment, you could practically hear the sound of a career criminal's house of cards collapsing. The wellness warriors, gone silent. Derek, quiet as a church mouse. Wes, watching with the calm satisfaction of a man who had been waiting weeks for the truth to surface. Karen's entire strategy depended on one thing: nobody questioning her confidence. The second someone did, the whole illusion shattered. And if forging legal documents seems like rock bottom, hang on, because the next fact reveals the real motive behind their madness. And trust me, it wasn't yoga, healing, or community unity. It was something way bigger and way more profitable. Whenever a neighborhood dispute seems too wild to make sense, remember rule number 1 in American investigative news: follow the money. And when Wes's neighbor Eddie came knocking with a stack of documents one morning, that's exactly what happened. Because inside that stack was the smoking gun, the truth behind why Karen and Derek had gone scorched earth on a quiet 62-year-old beekeeper. It all began with Derek's company, Streamline Solutions, a tech consulting firm that Wes assumed handled cloud storage or server management, or something equally boring. But beneath the surface, this wasn't some harmless IT business. This was a data center developer, and their newest target was Wes's 15 acres of rural California soil. His land, according to Derek's own business assessments, was the ideal location for a $20 million server farm. Rural zoning, high-speed fiber access, low noise restrictions, tax incentive potential, future expansion capability. It was perfect. Too perfect. Too perfect, in fact, that Derek and Karen had drawn up an entire 6-month acquisition plan. Step 1, harass the owner. Step 2, burden him with complaints. Step 3, claim community access. Step 4, host events to assert adverse possession. Step 5, force a below-market sale. Step 6, flip the land into a multi-million-dollar server operation. And this wasn't their first rodeo. Eddie's son Pete, a lawyer, had dug deep and discovered 2 previous towns where Karen and Derek pulled the exact same routine. Pleasanton. They targeted an elderly nursery owner, drove down the value, and bought the land for $250,000 less than market price. Derek turned it into a development site and walked away with nearly $3 million in profit. Petaluma. They harassed a veteran who raised therapy horses. After 6 months of bogus complaints and code enforcement pressure, he sold. Derek later developed the property into a data hub worth $3.2 million. The pattern was chilling. They didn't just accidentally bully people. They strategically bullied them. Harassment, social pressure, legal manipulation, forged evidence, public shaming, property value sabotage. And after breaking their target's resolve, they swooped in with a sympathetic, lowball offer. This wasn't neighborly conflict. This was a criminal enterprise, a predatory land acquisition model dressed up as community improvement. And Wes? He wasn't just a random target. He was a jackpot. But Derek miscalculated one thing. Wes wasn't alone. He had neighbors, firefighters, veterans, and friends willing to step in, plus decades of experience dealing with crisis under pressure. When Wes and Eddie connected the dots between past victims and present tactics, the truth lit up like sirens on a highway. Karen's yoga festival wasn't a feel-good gathering. It was a land grab, designed to produce footage, photos, and community use records to support a fake legal claim. And that septic tank leak? That was just the universe doing its own investigative journalism. Suddenly, everything made sense. The harassment, the walkers, the forgery, the desperate scrambling, the aggressive lies. They weren't after Wes's bees. They were after his acres. And once the motive was exposed, Karen started spiraling. Fast. Because when con artists panic, they don't slow down, they speed up. And in the next fact, she goes from forging documents to attempting a straight-up felony.
Some people make mistakes quietly. Karen made them loud enough for the entire county to hear. On the eve of her massive illegal festival, less than 24 hours before 500 campers were scheduled to invade Wes's property, she made one more desperate attempt to shut him down. She brought in a county agricultural inspector, Jim Valdez, a by-the-book, impossible-to-bribe public employee known for rejecting donuts because it could look like favoritism. But Karen didn't see that type. She saw an obstacle. She met him in Wes's driveway, armed with a laminated inspection checklist she printed from who knows where, and immediately started feeding him exaggerated claims. He has too many hives. He's running a commercial honey business. He's endangering children. He's violating livestock ordinances. Valdez took notes, walked the property, checked every hive, every structure, every document Wes handed him. Everything was legal. Everything was permitted. Everything was compliant. The inspection was going fine until Karen made her next move. She pulled the inspector aside, speaking in that hushed conspiratorial voice people use when they're about to do something incredibly stupid. "Look, Jim, I know this seems minor, but this guy is causing real problems for our community development. What would it take to find a couple violations? You know, just enough to shut him down for the weekend." Then she pulled out an envelope, a thick envelope. Valdez opened it. Cash. Stacks of crisp bills. Karen called it a consulting fee. Jim called it what it was, a felony. He asked her point blank, "Ma'am, are you offering me money to falsify an inspection?" She backpedaled so hard she could have qualified for the Olympic sprinting team. No, it's just compensation for your extra effort," she insisted. Too late. Eddie, Wes's neighbor, was standing nearby, phone in hand, recording the entire interaction. It was the cleanest evidence law enforcement could ask for. Audio, video, witness, cash, intent. Game, set, match. Valdez returned the envelope and informed Karen he'd be filing a report with the district attorney the same day. And in an almost comedic twist, he added, "This is not the first time someone tried this exact same thing. Same type of event, same complaints. 6 months ago, in Petaluma." Yep, the same inspector, Karen, had tried bribing before. That's when Karen's face went pale, because she realized she had just connected herself to her own criminal pattern. But unbelievably, Karen still hadn't hit rock bottom, because her biggest disaster, her ultimate unforgettable meltdown, happened on the very morning of the festival when she triggered a biological response she never saw coming. Picture this. It's Saturday morning. Crisp, sunny, quiet. And then, chaos. 500 campers pour into Wes's field. Teslas nose to nose, Subaru Outbacks forming mini parking lots, influencers posing with coffee cups, food trucks firing up grills, portable toilets being lined up like soldiers, a sound system so loud it could rattle drywall 5 counties away. Karen strutted around the property like a festival director. She had a clipboard, a bullhorn, and a confidence level so inflated it needed its own zip code. Wes watched from his porch, sipping his coffee, calm, collected, and fully aware of what was coming. Because behind the scenes, he and Eddie had spent the entire week preparing something that would soon enter the unofficial Hall of Fame for most poetic property justice ever recorded. Wes had rigged 6 of his hives with motion trigger release mechanisms. These weren't weapons. They were simply designed so that if something shook the area with enough force, the hive entry barriers would drop naturally, allowing the bees to respond on their own. And if you know bees, you know this. Bees hate vibrations, especially deep bass. Especially 40,000 bees who've spent weeks being harassed by trespassers. So when Karen stepped onto the stage and shouted, "Let's turn up the bass for full community impact," it was over. The speakers rumbled, the subwoofers shook the ground, the hive stands vibrated, and then the buzzing started. A low hum at first, then louder still, until the air over the campsite shifted into a moving cloud, a swirling, living storm of honeybees emerging like nature's own security force. First Rodriguez hive, then Murphy hive,
then Kowalski hive, then all the rest. Within 60 seconds, bees filled the sky like a biological fog machine. Screams, running, panic stampedes, yoga mats flying like frisbees, food truck workers abandoning grills mid-burrito. It was instant, unavoidable, karmic pandemonium. And Karen? Frozen, speechless, bullhorn dangling from her hand, eyes wide as the disaster she created unfolded in real time. And you won't believe what happened next, because the bee storm wasn't even the final blow. The final blow came when law enforcement arrived, and Karen tried to lie her way out of the entire scandal on live television.
When the bees dispersed and most of the festival crowd sped away like the apocalypse was tracking them, law enforcement finally rolled up the long gravel drive, lights flashing, boots hitting the ground, and body cameras rolling. Deputy Martinez, Inspector Valdez, and 2 county officials stepped out of their vehicles with that calm, controlled posture that says, "We already know what happened, but we're giving you a chance to make this easy." Karen saw that uniforms, straightened her shoulders, grabbed her bullhorn, and did the most Karen thing imaginable. She marched straight toward the officers while a local TV crew, alerted earlier about an illegal wellness event shutdown, filmed the entire interaction. And this is where the legend was born. Karen tried to spin the narrative like she was the anchor, the director, and the PR team all at once. "This is a peaceful gathering," she shouted into her bullhorn, while the camera zoomed out to reveal overturned chairs, half-collapsed tents, people sprinting the cars, and a cloud of bees still hovering like nature's paparazzi. Deputy Martinez calmly spoke, "Ma'am, please set down the megaphone and step aside." Karen didn't. If anything, she doubled down harder. "This man," she declared dramatically, pointing the bullhorn at Wes, "just unleashed a biological swarm on innocent community members. He should be arrested immediately." The reporter's eyebrows shot up so high they could have left his forehead. Wes, standing 3 steps behind the deputy with a cup of coffee still in hand, didn't even flinch. The bees were already returning to their hives like tiny soldiers, satisfied with the mission well executed. Inspector Valdez stepped forward. "Ma'am, you organized a commercial event without permits, trespassed, forged documents, offered a bribe to a county employee, and facilitated a septic runoff violation." Karen blinked. "Those documents were real," she insisted. The county recorder who had just arrived responded, "Ma'am, the document you submitted includes a seal discontinued in 1993, a font that didn't exist until 2006, and a signature from a man who retired in 1981. You could hear a pin drop and a bee buzz. But Karen wasn't done digging. "This is an abuse of government authority," she screeched. "I have every right to lead this community." Deputy Martinez asked, "As what exactly?" And here's where she broke the internet. Karen raised her hands dramatically and said, "I am the de facto custodian of this land's spiritual destiny." The reporter coughed. Eddie snorted. A bee literally landed on the bullhorn like it was trying to interview her. The officer continued, "Ma'am, you have video of you offering a bribe, hosting an illegal event, forging documents, and trespassing." Karen swallowed. Her voice softened. This is clearly a misunderstanding." And that's when the reporter stepped forward with the microphone extended and delivered the most unintentionally comedic question in local news history. "Ma'am, how do you misunderstand offering someone an envelope full of cash?" Karen froze, mouth open, eyes darting like she was searching for a script that had blown away in the wind. But the cameras were rolling. The bees were buzzing. The deputies were done. Deputy Martinez finally stated, "Ma'am, at this time you are being detained pending investigation." It wasn't an arrest,
yet, but it was enough to send Karen spiraling into the realization that the narrative she tried to control had slipped out of her hands and into the lap of the entire nation. But the meltdown wasn't the end, not even close. Because what happened in court turned the entire saga from chaotic comedy to legal knockout. After the bee-driven exodus, forged document scandal, bribery attempt, environmental violations, and public meltdown, the county attorney had enough material to host a full-season Netflix special. The courtroom was packed. Locals, farmers, neighbors, a few newscasters. And yes, several beekeepers who came wearing tiny bee pins like they were attending the Oscars of agriculture. Wes entered calmly, suit pressed, paperwork in hand. 30 years of firefighting had taught him how to stay composed under pressure. This was nothing compared to running into burning buildings. Karen entered dramatically, sunglasses on, scarf draped like she was stepping onto a runway instead of a hearing about her own misconduct. The judge, an older woman who had zero patience for suburban theatrics, started the proceedings with a smack of her gavel that made the whole room jump. First came the trespassing evidence, drone footage, photographs, screenshots of her event page, the ticket sale link, the promotional Instagram graphics with captions like, "Camp under the stars, only 50 spots left." Then came the forged documents. The judge held the fake easement papers between her fingers like they were contaminated with stupidity. "This seal," she said, tapping it, "is from a department that didn't even exist until 1997. Karen swallowed, hard. Then came the bribery video. Inspector Valdez's calm voice, Karen's whispering, the envelope, the cash, and the moment she said, "Just a few violations, enough to shut him down." The judge paused the video, leaned forward and spoke in that slow, deliberate tone that signals someone is about to verbally end your entire career. "Mrs. Westfield, this is not persuasion, this is not community management, this is bribery, blatant bribery." If the courtroom had oxygen meters, they'd have dropped instantly. Then came the sewer leak evidence, environmental reports, aerial diagrams, photos, the revelation that her cistern had been illegally draining onto Wes's property. Karen attempted to object. "Your Honor, that contamination is symbolic." The judge raised one eyebrow so high it practically filed an objection of its own. "Mrs. Westfield, wastewater is many things. Symbolic is not one of them." Then Wes was called to speak, and in true firefighter fashion, he kept it simple, straightforward, and factual. "I keep bees, legally. I maintain my land, legally. I pay taxes, legally. All I asked for was for people to stay off my property, stop trespassing, and stop claiming ownership of land that isn't theirs." The courtroom nodded in agreement. Even the bees in the diagrams seemed to nod. Finally, the ruling. The judge hit the gavel. Karen was found to be liable for trespassing, guilty of forging state documents, guilty of attempting to bribe a government official, responsible for environmental contamination, responsible for unpermitted commercial activity, financially liable for damages. Her fines stacked so high the county clerk had to organize them alphabetically. Meanwhile, the Wellness Weekend Facebook page quietly disappeared, like it had never existed. But the internet never forgets. And just when Karen thought the saga was over, nature delivered one last poetic punch, a finale involving bees, blessings, and bitter irony.
1 week after the court ruling, the town held a small gathering, a thank you luncheon for Wes, his neighbors, the inspectors, and the deputies who handled what locals were now calling the Great Wellness War. People laughed, shared stories, passed around jars of honey Wes had bottled himself. And that's when the strangest, most unintended, and most poetic moment occurred. A reporter asked Wes if he regretted using his bees, even though he
never technically used them. They simply reacted to vibrations and protected their territory. Wes smiled. The kind of slow, peaceful smile only a man who lived through 3 decades of chaos can deliver. "I didn't release them," he said. "They released themselves. I just let nature handle nature." He explained how bees don't attack unless threatened, how the bass vibrations from Karen's illegally amplified sound system mimicked the signals of a predator, how the bees poured out, not out of aggression, but instinct. A local biology teacher stepped forward and added, "Bees respond to disruption. They just defend the hive." And suddenly, right there, in that simple explanation, the entire town understood the deeper truth. Everything Karen did, the trespassing, the harassment, the forged documents, the takeover attempts, the environmental damage, was a disruption. And the bees? They defended the hive. The symbolism was almost too perfect. Nature itself stood with Wes. Nature itself rejected Karen's takeover. Nature itself delivered justice. A soft breeze blew through the field. The wildflowers swayed. A few honeybees drifted lazily through the air, peaceful, calm, unbothered. For the first time in weeks, the land felt like itself again. No crowds, no trespassers, no fraudulent community leaders. Just a rancher, his bees, and the land they'd protected for generations. And that's when Eddie clinked his water bottle against Wes's and said the line that would later go viral online. "You didn't have to sting her, Wes. The bees did it for you." The crowd laughed. Even the judge, who'd attended quietly in the back, cracked a rare smile. In the end, Karen left the community. The HOA elected a new president. The septic system was rebuilt. The forged documents became training material for the county fraud department. And Wes? He went back to tending his hives. Back to peace, back to quiet, back to letting nature do what nature does best. And that brings us to the end of this unbelievable saga, a story of property rights, community chaos, and the wild moment when honeybees became the unsung heroes of American justice. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of the wildest neighborhood showdowns in recent American history, make sure you hit that like button. Seriously, it helps us bring you more insane real-world stories just like this. Subscribe to Global Pulse News for daily high-energy breakdowns, investigations, and the kind of stories that make you turn to your friends and say, "Hold up, this actually happened?" Drop a comment below telling us your favorite moment from this saga. Was it the forged documents, the wellness walkers, the septic disaster, or the legendary moment when 40,000 bees became the most effective security team in the state? And if you've ever dealt with an HOA nightmare, a trespasser, or a real-life Karen, tell us your story. We read every comment. Stay tuned, stay sharp, and as always, stay in the loop with Global Pulse, where the truth hits harder than a bullhorn on full volume.